Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Ammons. Welcome to the Ingles table. Today I'm going to show you how to make one of my favorite recipes, pot au feu. I love this stuff and it's perfect for the fall. I got everything I need from my local Ingles, so let's get started. Pot au feu is a very traditional old French recipe, and it basically comes from the idea that you don't need stock to make a good soup. You can start with water. And by adding your ingredients and slow stewing your meat, you will create the stock as you go along. So we've got our water boiling over here. We're going to add a healthy bit of salt. And we're going to add this is just a chuck steak. Try not to use very fancy or expensive cuts. You do not want fancy or expensive cuts for this. Because it'll fall apart. You want something with a little bit of sinew in it, a little bit of fat in there, because that fat's going to dissolve as it heats up and as it stews, and that's going to make your stock really rich. That's going to make everything in this dish just pop. We're going to leave that in there for about an hour and a half, set a timer for about an hour and a half, and let it just simmer. You don't want it to be a rumbling boil. You just want it to look kind of like it's looking right now with just a few bubbles every now and then. After that goes for an hour and a half, we'll start adding other ingredients, but this is the way that we get our base flavor for the stock. So that's been going for about an hour and a half now. We're going to start adding our seasonings, which will get it some other flavor. You kind of want to keep it this way just to taste it and spoon taste everything and make sure that you're getting flavors coming out of that. You'll see it's at a pretty low simmer. We're going to go in with some fresh thyme, or dried thyme, excuse me. Fresh if you have it. Dried if you don't. Some black pepper, and this is where all of your flavors are coming from. You're not using stock out of a box for this. You're not using homemade stock. You're using water, so you kind of have to add the flavorings yourself. We're adding clove. Clove is actually kind of fun in a stew. It adds a real subtlety to the food, and it just gives it a nice little kick that feels a little different. I have all my prep here, but I'm just going to throw in the garlic for starters and let that go for another few minutes. And then in about 30 more minutes, we'll start adding in our root vegetables. So it's been another half hour, and it's time to start adding some of our root vegetables. You're gonna wanna start adding any of your root vegetables take a little longer to cook. So we're just gonna get those in. Ooh. And we're just going to let that keep simmering until it starts to reduce. All right, so we've reduced a good bit in there. Our veggies are starting to come along, our root veggies, and that means it's time to add our mirepoix. This is just going to be onions, celery, and carrots, kind of the classic flavors that go into any stock, into any soup flavor. It's important to remember that these things are going to cook way quicker than those potatoes or that meat have been. That meat needs all that time to stew and get nice and tender. These just need enough time to give off their flavors and to soften enough to eat. You don't want to nuke these, because if you left them in there for an hour, it would just turn into mush. So we're going to be adding these at the last minute so that you don't want them in there for any more than, I would say, 20 minutes. That's a long time, but you want to keep tasting your stock and see when the flavors kind of come together, and that's going to be when you know you're done. So in with the last of those. Pot's starting to get a little crowded. You can add anything you want in here too. This is a great way if you want to just do this vegetarian. It would be a lot simpler. You would not have the strong meat stock flavor, but you could do it with a little more pungent herbs and a little more pungent vegetables, and it would still create a good stock and flavorful stock. But with this one, you primarily want to be using some kind of beef, or lamb works well here as well. You can do this with pork, and you want to be using those cheap cuts of meat that have a little bit of fat to them, that are a little tougher, because you want all that time in the pot to break them down. And at that point, we'll get this little cover and just let it go for another 20 minutes. And by then the sauce will have thickened up, and when you taste it, add some salt or pepper, whatever you think is going to be just right, and you'll be about ready to go. All right, so it's been another 20 minutes or so, and everything's starting to really come together in here. We're getting a nice kind of brothy texture. It's got a nice color to it, and our meat started to kind of fall apart on its own, which is kind of what you want. See how that's just pulling apart easily with a fork, you kind of want to go through and you want to pull the rest of that meat before you put it all back in the pot. It's very tender. It's just perfectly seasoned as well because most of our seasoning is coming from that broth that it's just been stewing in for the last hour and a half, 2 hours. Let the rest continue to stew. And then just as you go, just add it right back in. You can serve this a couple different ways. I like to serve it over egg noodles. You can just serve it with bread if that's all you have. You can serve it over rice. Any kind of starch goes well with this and makes for just a perfect serving. Into our pot, we're gonna start pulling our potatoes and turnips. Some of those carrots, celery, onion, all just perfectly cooked at this point. And you can take that stock when you're done, you can make gravy with it, you can do all kinds of things if you have leftover stock by the time this is finished. But there you have it, a really healthy, hearty stew. That's pot au feu, that's just a classic, as classic of a French dish as you can get. You want to serve it with gherkins and a little bit of mustard, goes well, just toss it right on top and mix it in, eat it all together. Thanks so much for joining me here at the Ingles table. Be sure to check out the rest of our website for more tips, tricks, and recipes. I'll see you next time.